Dumb Husky and his white cat Shizun. Chapter 301. Shisheng Peak. Reduplication of the past. Within the torrential rain, a newly formed group of insurgents stood in front of the mountain. There were cultivators from all the different sects. The gate of time and space, life and death had opened, and everything was still unknown. In front of them were many dangers, thus the heart of this newly formed allies were all unsteady, they all had different plans. Almost no one wanted to take the lead. They were all worried that the Zhenlong chess pieces that were hibernating at Shisheng Peak would once again confront the masters of tigers and wolves that they had once encountered at Mount Qiao. They looked into the distance, their hearts anxious. Could there be a demon sitting with his eyes closed within the rain-shrouded Wushan Palace, waiting for the group of heroes to use their weapons so that they could tear everyone into pieces? Someone raised a torch that was ignited by an incantation, raised his head and looked at the majestic mountain peak, muttering to himself, unexpectedly. The Tianyan Pavilion would actually do such a thing. I still feel like I'm dreaming. Stop sighing. The beaten manners Zhen Kongming patted that person's shoulder. Since you have the time to talk so much, why don't you think about how to attack the mountain and quickly end this nightmare? Someone else gloomily said, I'm afraid it's not that simple. Mu Yanli had the blood of the gods in her body. Hua Binan is a grand master of the medicine sect, and that Emperor Taxian Jun, that person's power is profound and his personality is insidious. We should still be cautious. We must not let our guard down. This cultivator's words won the approval of many people. If Xuemeng from his previous life were to stand here, he would definitely feel that his life was going around in circles and had eventually returned to its starting point. The scene before him was so similar to the night when the 10 great sects had attacked Shisheng Peak of the world of Taxian Jun when he had killed himself. Unfortunately, the person in the crowd right now was not the Xuemeng from that life but the young man who had just lost his parents. Although he was handsome, his face was haggard. In order to show that he was mourning, he did not wear the bright silver armor of the Shisheng Peak sect. He was dressed only in plain blue and his ponytail was tied up with a white ribbon. Xuemeng opened his mouth and said, let's not even talk about this. If this continues, we will not be able to salvage the situation. What do you mean by being insidious? If you are afraid, you can stay here. There's no need for you to go up. Everything was the same as in his previous life. Just like back then, when Xuemeng said this, the surrounding people exploded. Once again, he became the target of public criticism. Young Master Xue, your words are really too excessive. What do you mean afraid? The female cultivator from the Jiangdong Hall had her eyebrows raised high. You are not afraid. But a few days ago, you went to the Wushan Palace to assassinate the Emperor Taxian Jun, and the result? You were the one who lost, and you even dragged Meitbun down to clean up the mess with you. You. A slender white hand blocked Xuemeng's path, silver bells jingling on his wrist. Xuemeng said angrily, you don't have to meddle in other people's business. How can it be called meddling when it is about the son of my benefactor? As he spoke, he turned his head to smile at the female cultivator who was blushing at every occasion. Besides, the words of such a good-looking lady aren't pleasant to the ears. Of course, I have to guide her so that she can correct her mistakes. He said politely, helping Xuemeng is assisting a friend of mine and not cleaning up a mess. Heaven and earth are on my side, my heart is clear. I hope that the young lady won't wrongly accuse me. In the martial world, who didn't know of Meitbun's charm? The female cultivator was instantly speechless and her face swelled up like a pig's liver. Seeing him like that, the female cultivator's partner felt the top of his head turn green, so he taunted, interesting, young Master Xue is invincible by himself while we are all cowards, why don't you go up the mountain and scout first? In any case, you are the most familiar with the Shisheng Peak, and I heard that the Emperor Taxian Jun is your cousin Mo Weiyu in other life. No matter what, he won't take your life. Many people revealed an awkward expression when they heard the words Taxian Jun. Back then, Grandmaster Mo had told them the truth. Back then, they had thought that he was plotting something and that it was full of nonsense. But now, things had come to the surface. Everything was as Mo Ran had said, and many people were beginning to feel uneasy. Unfortunately, not everyone had the same attitude. An elderly cultivator lightly coughed and said, "Actually, I feel that the identity of that Emperor Taxian Jun still needs to be verified." Xuemeng coldly looked at him. "Verified what?" The old man said, "What I mean is, although that Taxian Jun is the same as Mo Ran, it doesn't necessarily mean that it was the Mo Ran of another life. After all, anything is possible." "That's right, I still feel that the one Tianyan Pavilion killed was Mo Ran himself, that this previous life is not really so, but a reason, an excuse." Even at this point, there were still some among the crowd who believed that Grandmaster Mo was lying and that they had not wrongly accused him. After all, there were some among them who had once spoken out and humiliated him back in the Tianyan Pavilion. Someone had thrown a stone at him on the third day of the trial and mocked him. Furthermore, admitting that Grandmaster Mo was speaking the truth is equivalent to admitting that they have been deceived and slandered an innocent person. To some people, this is simply too embarrassing. Sometimes it takes more courage to admit fault than to make a mistake, and cowards clearly lack it. In order to maintain that they did not make a mistake, they were determined not to let Mo Ran make their mistake known. No matter how much grievance, humiliation, and guilt he suffered, he would never be at peace for 2 lifetimes. They still wanted him to bear this crime. To these gentlemen, the innocence of others compared to their own face was nothing. When Mei Hangxiu heard this, he complimented him with a smile, "Cultivator Sun, you are truly a proud and unyielding character that cannot be broken." The old man was stunned. After pondering for a long time, he realized that Mei Hangxiu was laughing at him. He couldn't help but be furious. He rushed forward and wanted to fight him, but was stopped by an old monk. Master Xianjing advised, "All right, both of you, stop quarreling. Listen to what this old monk has to say first. It doesn't matter what Taxian Jun is. What's important is how we should deal with him and how we should deploy our forces after we reach the mountain." He turned around and asked Xuemeng amiably, "Young Master Xue, you're the one who fought with Taxian Jun. From your point of view, how good is this person's martial prowess?" Xuemeng gritted his teeth, clenched his fists and said, "Gathering the power of all the sect leaders here would not guarantee a win." "Ha!" That cultivator soon raised his white eyebrows. "What a proud son of heaven! He really does know how to increase his strength and extinguish his own prestige." Master Xianjing was a little shocked. In that case, this person should be quite a bit stronger than Grandmaster Chu. No wonder Grandmaster Chu was kidnapped by him. Kidnapped? Who didn't know about the dirty affairs between Chu Wanning and Mo Ran? In my opinion, it's not kidnapping at all, and Taxian Jun isn't some kind of a past life. This whole thing was orchestrated by Mo Ran, who was also in the same group as Chu Wanning. If you don't believe me, let's go up the mountain and see. Xuemeng's face suddenly paled. If it was before, he would have already angrily roared and pounced towards this old man to smash his mouth, but not long ago, he had just learned the truth behind the matter between Shizun and Mo Ran. While he was in a sorry state, a tall, light green figure lightly covered him. Zhang Shi said coldly, "You are too audacious. If the events after the mountain are not what you said, then I don't think you need to keep that bewitching tongue of yours." The old cultivator facial muscles twitched and his lips seemed to want to say something. However, after muttering to himself for a long time, he was unable to spit in front of Zhang Shi. He finally shut his mouth. Zhang Shi cast a sidelong glance at Xuemeng and didn't say anything more. He lowered his head and pondered for a while, then said to the others, "Let's not delay this any longer. First, we'll arrange the targets for the decisive battle, then we'll act immediately." His gaze turned towards the other sect leaders and elders, as if he was confirming something, excluding the Zhenlong chess pieces, who is known to be at Shisheng Peak. People around him replied, "We'll definitely meet Mu Yanli." Zhang Shi asked, "Has anyone fought with her before?" A female cultivator raised her hand. "I exchanged a few blows with her during the internal strife." Zhang Shi asked, "How's her martial prowess?" The female cultivator thought for a moment and said, "Sending 3 elders should be enough to stall her." "All right. Which 3 elders are willing to lock onto Mu Yanli after the battle starts?" The people at Shisheng Peak had long regarded Mu Yanli as a thorn in their side. At this time, 3 elders immediately came out, Elder Suanji, Elder Tanlang and Elder Lu. The 3 of them were from the same sect, and they all had excellent skills in healing and offense. Zhang Shi agreed without hesitation. Zhang Shi asked again, "What else?" "There are also the disciples from the Tianyan Pavilion. Their number is not that great. However, there are at least 600 or 700 of them and their strength is hard to estimate." Zhang Shi mused, "The closest martial art to the Tianyan Pavilion is the Wuobei Temple." He raised his eyes to look at Master Xianjing. "Master Xianjing, are you willing to let the disciples of the temple engage the Tianyan Pavilion disciples during the war?" This. Master Xianjing secretly decided the pros and cons of this move. The drawbacks were obvious. The number and strength of the disciples within the Tianyan Pavilion were unknown. It would be best for them if they turn out to be weak, but if they were strong, then the temple's vitality would be greatly damaged. At the very least, they no longer had to face the most frightening of all, Taxian Jun. Thus, he nodded his head, "This old monk will naturally share the worries of the world. What's left is Hua Binan." Zhang Shi sighed and closed his eyes, "No need for that." Although Gai Yuye couldn't be said to be familiar with his every move and every trick, he at least had the same origin as us. During the great battle, I'll ask that the elders of my sect keep an eye on this person, and not show any mercy. After all these arrangements were made, all that was left were the Zhenlong chess pieces and Taxian Jun. Zhang Shi's eyes swept across the crowd, but other than a few cultivators, most of them suddenly felt as if their heads were too heavy. Their heads were all lowered and some even reached out to touch their necks, as if they were in great pain. "Palace Master." Mingyulo nodded. "The Taxia Palace should be able to help." Zhang Shi then asked the Pavilion Master, who then nodded and said, "It's our responsibility." But apart from this, the other sects were either afraid of trouble or were unsuited for battle. Those in charge of them were more or less hesitant. There were even some people who muttered, "Since that Taxian Jun was able to open the gate of time and space, life and death, the power of these sect leaders is definitely not enough." "That's right, isn't this the same as daring to kill scouts?" Someone then sighed, "If only the Rufeng sect was still here. The cultivators of the 72 cities have so many city lords." Sigh. "What a pity." Huh. Suddenly, a Jiangdong Hall cultivator raised his voice, "What about that Ye Wangzi girl? Wasn't she very good at fighting?" "Most likely, their strength would be comparable to 10 Nangong Lu. They would definitely have the battle power of a sect leader." "Where is she?" Zhang Shi's face darkened when she was mentioned. He gloomily replied, "Before we left, we settled down a group of refugees in Gaiyuye. At that time, we decided to keep cultivators in guard to prevent the Zhenlong chess pieces from pressing on their territory. No one volunteered. In the end she stayed." That cultivator let out an ah and revealed an awkward expression. Zhang Shi said gloomily, "They are true heroes here. Why do you need a little girl everywhere?" After a while, there were still few people in the crowd who did want to go ahead. The young and beautiful new sect leader of the Jiangdong Hall stammered, "I think we still have to think about it carefully. After all, this is not a joke. Let's wait a little while longer." Hearing the word wait, Xuemeng immediately became so angry that his lips turned blue. He did his best to suppress his anger and asked, "How much longer do we have to wait? How does waiting any longer make any difference? But we can't go up the mountain and die. Success or failure will be decided in one move. Young Master Shui, be careful." Master Xianjing also advised, "Young Master Shui, be careful." Now that the world had turned upside down and the Shisheng Peak had disappeared, no one knew what kind of changes would occur in front of them. At present, all of the top cultivators in the cultivation world were gathered here. If all the sticks were to fall into the water, who would be responsible for it? Yes, what should we do if the sect leaders and the elders are killed? Xuemeng had been holding back this whole time, but now he could not hold it in any longer. He suddenly raised his head, his eyes blood red. "Your sect leader is not yet dead and you're already thinking of what to do when they did. Then, what about Shisheng Peak?" When the topic of Shisheng Peak was brought up, everyone could not help but think of the sect leader and his wife who had been wrongly accused and had both perished. "I don't know what to do about Shisheng Peak." Xuemeng's voice was slightly hoarse. "I don't have a cousin, a Shikshan, a mother, or a father anymore. Now, not even Shizun." Xuemeng's eyelashes trembled slightly and his Adam's apple moved, as if he was doing his utmost to swallow his pain. However, that pain was too deep for him to bear. He closed his eyes and then opened them again. "If the sect leaders are afraid of death because they still have a legacy, then I am not. So I am not afraid of death." Mei Hangxiu, who was standing beside them, frowned and whispered, "Xuemeng." But how could he listen? No one in this world could stop him anymore. Xuemeng said, "If you don't want to go, then I'll go by myself." "Young master." The disciples at Shisheng Peak all stepped forward to advise against it, but Xuemeng had already made up his mind and displayed his murderous intent. He turned around and left everyone behind. The anger and grievance he had been enduring all became tears rolling down his cheeks that no one could see. Standing amidst the torrential rain, Jiangxi gazed at his back. "You." Hearing his voice, Xuemeng walked even faster. His long cheng was already shattered. He did not even have a decent sword. However, he still walked towards the majestic Shisheng Peak without looking back. "Xuemeng." After a few moments of hesitation, a hoarse shout finally came out of Jiangxi's throat with great difficulty. Jiangxi walked up and before his hand could touch Xuemeng's shoulder, he saw the young man suddenly turn around. A fiery light flashed in his round bird-like eyes as he angrily shouted, "Get lost! Don't touch me!" With that, he flung Jiangxi's hand away and left without giving anyone a chance to speak. On the steps, the moss grew and the bamboo grew. Xuemeng breathed heavily as he sprinted through the torrential rain. In front of him was a world that was moist like a dream. There, Madame Wang had once stood beneath the moon and watched a peony blossom. At that time, Xue Zhenyang was a mighty man who had returned from the battle and raised his spear. As Xuemeng walked through the white stone gate, he saw Shimei lowering his head and muttering to himself. He ran past the heroic pillar and saw Mo Ran looking at the moon. He saw the bustling disciples in the wind and rain coming from a class, laughing on top of the Nahi bridge. He sped up his pace as if he were running for his life, like a tiger in the woods. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw an old peach tree. He saw his young self kowtowing 9 times under the tree. He raised his head with a smile and said to Chu Wanning, who was waving his white robe, "Disciple Xuemeng greets Shizun." He suddenly closed his eyes. Shisheng Peak held too many memories, burning his 5 inner organs one by one. There used to be so much fire here, but now there's so much dust. Xuemeng walked on the road. The wind and rain were blowing and the memories of the past faded away. "Don't follow me. Don't let me see this again," he muttered as he shuttled back and forth among the lingering shadows, fleeing from the time of his high-spirited youth. When he stood on the peak of the mountain, he was soaked through under the rain. He was like a phoenix whose feathers had already withered, shivering slightly. He felt cold. His bones were frozen to ice. He narrowed his thick eyelashes and looked at the distant palace. The candlelight was dim. This was the Shisheng Peak in his previous life. The last time he came here to assassinate him, he didn't pay any attention to it. Suddenly, he caught a glimpse of 3 tombs standing in front the sky-reaching pagoda. This was something he had never seen in his own sect before. He could not help but walk over to take a closer look. Out of the 3 tombs, one of them had the stir-fry empress gouged in it, while the other had been flattened. The stone tablet had fallen to the side. The last one was very old. In front of the tomb, there was a faint shadow, standing alone. The person stood in front of the grave, his robe stained with blood, his wide sleeves reaching the ground. He raised his hand to stroke the words on the tombstone. Xuemeng was shocked. His skull felt as if it had been pierced by an arrow and all the blood in his body surged. He shouted, "Mo Ran." He reached to draw Longcheng but his waist was empty. Only then did he recall that the Longcheng had already been destroyed. It shattered during his last confrontation with Taxian Jun. The man who had his back to him seemed to be unable to hear anything, only slowly bending over the tombstone as if he was finally reaching the end of an extremely weary journey. Xuemeng saw him gently rub his forehead against the cold stone. Xuemeng's palm suddenly ignited with a flame. Orange light scattered in all directions. He threw it towards the back of Taxian Jun without a care in the world. Bam! With a loud bang, the firelight did not hurt anyone, only the stone tablet that had grown old with age had shattered. He looked left and right, but there was no one around, no emperor, not a black figure, not a single person. The rain poured down around him like a torrential downpour. It was as if he was the only one left in the world. However, the tree shadows seemed to be hiding in the dark forest, hiding in the grass, waiting for the next moment. "Taxian Jun! Taxian Jun!" He shouted and his voice was instantly crushed into dust by the thunder. Did I see wrongly? How could it be wrong? It was clearly such a clear view of his back. He had clearly been standing here just now, yet that person had actually reached out his hand to touch the stone tablet, the stone tablet. Suddenly, he stopped. Xuemeng bent over, lifted his hand and slowly picked up the stone tablet that had been smashed into pieces. He picked up half of it, and in an instant, he felt as if he had fallen into a cave of ice. Astonishingly, the words on the stone tablet were, "The tomb of Chu Wanning." Whose grave? What tomb? Xuemeng suddenly stood up and staggered backwards. The white light of the lightning shone on his miserable face. Xuemeng shook his head and muttered, "No. No. What was going on? How is that possible?" He swallowed, trying to calm himself. He squatted there for a while, breathing heavily before finally recovering. Squinting his eyes, he examined the tombstone again. The monolith's body was already very mottled. It had been at least 10 years, and it was not new. The monolith was carved with varying depths, as if it had originally been carved with something else. Later on, someone had erased the original characters and carved these words anew. Shizun. Chu Wanning's tomb. This was the grave of his Shizun in the other life? Xuemeng's lips were blue and his entire body was trembling. It was unknown whether it was grief, anger, fear, or something else that was rolling in his chest. He buried his face in his hands and wiped away the wet rain. So, what kind of love and hatred did he have for the future? He did not know. He did not know, just like he did not know what had been carved on this tombstone and for what reason the inscription had been changed. I don't know. Xuemeng rested in place for a while, but when he opened his eyes, he saw that the dark golden shadow had appeared again. This time, the distance was even closer, and the lofty mountains and rivers that were embroidered with golden threads could be clearly seen. The figure seemed to be something between a soul and a living person. It was neither completely alive nor completely dead. As that person looked at sky-reaching pagoda from afar, Xuemeng vaguely heard him whispering to himself. Shizun, you. Please pay attention to me. The voice was ethereal, like a dream. I'm going home. I'm going home. I'll go home, he said, but there was a hint of confusion in his voice. Shizun. With a boom, it was as if thunder had smashed the earth apart. The belly of the mountains and rivers faintly trembled, and all of his internal organs went numb. But I don't have a home. The black and gold figure suddenly turned around. In this stormy rain, Xuemeng could clearly see his face, the face of Mo Ran. As if he didn't see him, Mo Ran continued to mutter to himself, I don't have a home anymore. I want to go back. I want to go back. He became anxious and desperate, let me go back, let me go back. I want to see him. I want to see him. Amidst the thunder and lightning, the black shadow rose into the air. Xuemeng was caught off guard by the cold and violent black wind. The shadow passed through him, carrying a bone-piercing chill. It was colder than rain. He was so dazed that he fell to the ground. I can't die. I want to see him. Xuemeng could clearly hear Mo Ran's low shout. The black shadow flew like a whirlwind towards the mountain behind Shisheng Peak. When he came back to his senses, he had already lost sight of the sky-reaching pagoda. At the back of the mountain, a sky-splitting red light was spurting out. What happened? What was that shadow just now? A ghost? He turned white and sat stiffly until someone slapped him in the back. At this time, Xuemeng's entire body was stretched to the limit, and upon contact, he fiercely jumped up, as if he had gone mad, and said with extreme helplessness, Who? Who is it? Mei Hangxiu held him down. Don't be afraid, it's me. Behind him, in the forest, an extremely ugly person from the Taxiu Palace walked out. However, he had a pair of light green eyes that Xuemeng was familiar with. It was the Mei Hangxiu brother with the cold mouth. His elder brother, Mei Hangxiu, stepped out of the forest, holding two swords in his hand. One was his holy weapon, Shuofeng, while the other was Suihuang. Mei Hangxiu walked up to the shivering Xuemeng and handed Jiangxi's sword to him. Sect leader Jiang wanted me to hand it over to you on his behalf. He said you could use it and you didn't have to refuse it for some reason. His younger brother was still curious. May I ask, what's your relationship with Jiangxi? Leave it. His words were mercilessly cut off by his big brother. Let's go to the Wushan Palace to check on Grand Master Chu's situation. As Mei Hangxiu said this, he shot a glance at Xuemeng and used his Shuofeng to knock on his shoulder. Without saying a word, he dove into the depths of the rain. As for his twin brother, he sighed and patted Xuemeng on the head before following his brother to Wushan Hall, amidst the wind and rain. End chapter. Dumb Husky and his white cat Shizun. Chapter 302. Shisheng Peak. Wushan Hall of Broken Soul. The Wushan Palace was the former Loyalty Hall. After Taxian Jun ascended to the throne, he adjusted the layout and divided it into three areas: the front hall, the middle courtyard, and the back hall. The two Mei brothers did not go in immediately. They stood at the door and waited for Xuemeng to follow them. His elder brother then told him, "This palace is not right. There is bewitching miasma inside." "What is bewitching miasma?" Mei Hangxiu explained, "It is a kind of fragrant miasma similar to the Chimen escape armor. It can be found in the plum forest of the Taxiu Palace. It has always been there." With an ashen face, Xuemeng asked, "What was it used for?" "It will make it impossible for the invader to find their way." Mei Hangxiu said, "This kind of miasma has no effect on people, but it can distort the scene and make people unable to find the real entrance. You know what people say about the wall-hitting ghost, it's probably something like that." Xuemeng. The elder Mei Hangxiu said coldly, "They are trying to stall for time. Most likely, someone is fighting in the rear palace." The younger Mei Hangxiu asked, What do we do? Can we get around it? The elder Mei Hangxue shot a glance at him. You've lived in the Taxu Palace for more than 20 years and you're asking me. Cough. The younger brother was somewhat embarrassed. He turned to Xuemeng and said, there's no other way around it? I can only enter and find the source of the miasma and disperse it? After glancing at Xuemeng's expression, he consoled, don't worry, I'm most adept at this. I often use the Taxu Palace's bewitching miasma at the back mountain to avoid the female cultivators who come over looking for trouble. Give me an incense stick of time and I should be able to break it. At the mention of this, his big brother's face turned black and his voice dropped like ice. You really have the face to say that? At this moment, Xuemeng was not in the mood to listen to their idle chatter. He took 2 steps forward and with a creak, he pushed open the front door of the Wushan Palace. Just like a ghost opening its stinky mouth, the carved lacquer door slowly opened, the interior was lit up by candles, it was completely silent. As Xuemeng stepped in, he could indeed smell the faint fragrance of flowers permeating the air. When he turned around, the Mei brothers were already gone. It seemed that before the miasma was dispersed, the 3 of them would see a different scene and would not be able to see each other at all. At this moment, a familiar voice came from the high throne in the great hall. Xuemeng. A chilly wind blew and the black gauze curtain fluttered. Shocked, Xuemeng shouted, Mo Ran. The voice sighed, it's you, right? Are you here? Xuemeng's throat moved as he tightened his spine. He lifted his sword and walked towards the dark depths of the hall. The tip of the sword lifted the curtains and then he saw it. Sitting on the high seat, there was a handsome, pale man with his eyes closed. The man was reclining in the throne, wearing a beaded diadem. His eyebrows were pitch black and his nose was sharp. Although his nose was high, it had a very fine curve to it. A pair of light-colored lips were pursed, but not much of an expression could be seen on his face. It was Taxian Jun. Taxian Jun's face was pale, his white corpse had a tinge of green, as if he had been poisoned. In front of him was a plate of fruits. The grapes were dark purple, the apples were thin and the mountains and rivers were painted in a silver plate, but the man on the throne room didn't even lift his eyelids. He wouldn't even look. Illusion. Reality. What was divided was not really true. Xuemeng's mind was buzzing. When he came back to his senses, he heard himself say, Mo Ran, you. It seemed as if Taxian Jun still hadn't woken up from his dream. He still had his eyes closed but he still replied. What? Perhaps the man in front of him was too weak, or perhaps in the torrential rain, Xuemeng had already vented out his boundless anger. At this moment, facing the illusion on the throne, his exhaustion was greater than his anger. He also did not know if Mo Ran would answer nor did he know what the meaning of his actions were. He only mumbled numbly, asking those questions that were accumulated in his chest and were about to crush him, why are you doing this? Did you come back from a new life? You and Shizun. Are you really? Of course, Taxian Jun didn't reply. He merely snorted, then slowly opened the curtain. In the midst of the bright lights, he glanced at Xuemeng and said, it seems like you and Shizun have not seen each other since the Taxu Palace 2 years ago. Xuemeng froze for a moment. What? Taxian Jun smiled and continued, Xuemeng, do you miss him? Xuemeng was stunned and asked, what do you mean Taxu Palace in Mount Kunlun? What 2 years? What kind of nonsense is this? This blurry illusion was actually the last conversation that Taxian Jun had had with Xuemeng when he had taken the poison in his other life. It was also the last words that Taxian Jun had left behind in that mortal world. The illusion came up at random and coincidentally happened to show the time before the 2 of them parted ways in their other life. But at this moment, Xuemeng didn't know. Drawing blank and getting angry, anxious, and frightened, he stared at the man on the throne and asked, what nonsense are you talking about? Taxian Jun's eyes were looking at him, but it also seemed as though he wasn't looking at him at all. It was as if through this real Shuemeng, he was looking at another shadow that did not exist. He talked to the shadow by himself, return him to you? Stupid words. You should think about it. Why would I allow Shizun to live in this world when there was such deep enmity between us? Shuemeng was speechless. Right. This was all an illusion. Even if he didn't say anything, Taxianjun would continue speaking without stopping. He was talking to someone he couldn't see. What was he talking about? Because Shuemeng could not understand the words of Taxianjun, he did not remember too much. But the eyes of the man on the throne were crazy and cold, stubborn and contradictory. This made Shuemeng's entire body turn cold. This was not his brother. He did not recognize him. Taxianjun was still talking viciously. You wanted to remind me that he beat me to a pulp and made me kneel down in front of everyone to plead guilty? Or was it to remind me that he had stood in front of me for your sake, for the sake of someone unrelated to him, repeatedly stopping me from doing what I wanted to do and ruining my great cause? Like a blind, clawed dragon, the emperor retained his final ferocity, exhausted, in the mud. He could not stop mumbling as if he was crazy or foolish like a demon. He looked very vicious, but he was actually very tired. He said, but we were master and disciple once. His corpse is resting in the Red Lotus Pavilion on the southern peak, lying amongst the red lotuses. I have preserved him very well, as if he had just fallen asleep. He added, his corpse was sustained by my spiritual energy, so it will not rot. If you miss him, then stop wasting your breath on me. Hurry up and go before I die. Shuemeng took a few steps forward as he tightly gripped Sui Huang in his hand. His hand was sweating profusely as he muttered, what are you talking about? In his previous life, who died? Whose body was resting in the Red Lotus Pavilion? Whose corpse were relying on Taxianjun's spiritual energy in order not to rot? Who? Fact was from Taxianjun's words, from the grave he saw in front of the sky-reaching pagoda, Shuemeng already had an answer in his heart. However, his mind felt as if it was filled with ice and his upper and lower lip constantly trembled. Who died? Who died? Suddenly, his face distorted, he rushed up to the hall. He reached out to tug at Mo Ran's clothes, but his 5 fingers directly passed through the illusion. With Taxianjun's face in his hands, he said hoarsely, go. Go see him. If I die and my spiritual power is cut off, he will turn to dust. As soon as he finished speaking, the man closed his eyes in disappointment. The poison had already taken effect. As for Shuemeng, his eyes were wide open as his entire body trembled. How did all this turn out like this? What kind of nonsense had happened in this mortal world? You killed him. Shuemeng's voice rustled as if about to destroy everything. It was you who killed him. Do you know everything about your rebirth? Do you have all your memories? Naturally, no one would answer him, but Shuemeng still asked. In this world, there were many answers. Knowing them would not make people happy and would only make them suffer. Yet, despite knowing these facts, they still had to ask. Cruel truth and tender lies, which is love and which is hate? If you knew, why did you lie to us? Brother, how could you bear it? How can you bear it? The other's face looked as though it was about to spasm. No one would look good when poison was cruising in one's body. Fresh blood flowed out from the corner of Taxianjun's mouth. He stood up, staggered and stood up, then walked unsteadily out of the hall. Where are you going? Shuemeng stretched out his hand towards that illusory image. You want to? Suddenly, his 5 fingers fell into a ball of warmth. Shuemeng quivered and the fragrance of the flowers disappeared from his nose. At the same time, the back of the black and gold figure that was walking towards the sunset disappeared. Mo ran. He was gone. With the illusion gone, Shuemeng's eyes and expression were very blank and shattered. Dreams and illusions, his previous and current lives, which one was real, which one was fake? The gate of time and space, life and death was opened, causing the once red world to be thrown into chaos. What was the real thing that happened, the Moran that was the true Moran? Who was he really? His gaunt face had a pitiful, shattered expression, and even his eyes were glazed. After a long time, his eyes gradually focused. In the brown pupils, Mei Hangxiu's silhouette was reflected. Wake up. Mei Hangxiu released his hand and flicked his forehead, causing Xuemeng to experience pain. It's over. Xuemeng froze for a while before he finally regained his senses. He muttered to himself, almost exhausted, I'm sorry. Mei Hangxiu pursed his lips, there is nothing to be sorry for. This type of confusion is very mysterious, and the more you worry about it, the more frightening it will become. Xuemeng raised his eyes and looked at him with his slightly moist black eyes. He actually didn't like talking to Mei Hangxiu, but the person in front of him right now was like the only real and stable existence in the midst of an illusion. He couldn't help but ask in a hoarse voice, what about you? What did you see? Mei Hangxiu did not answer immediately. He paused for a moment and then revealed a smile, over 10 years, there have been over 1,000 girls who have harmed me. Sigh, what a nice scene, I'm really worried about this. At this moment, they suddenly heard an earth-shattering explosion from the rear hall. Mei Hangxiu's gaze froze as he drew his sword and said, let's go. Xuemeng and Mei Hangxiu followed him through the torrential rain to the courtyard. When they arrived at the back hall, they first saw a white gold figure swimming up to the roof of the corridor. When the figure saw the 3 people who had barged in, she froze in her steps and lowered her eyes. A thunderclap illuminated her face. Mei Hangxiu's brows sank as he coldly asked, Mu Yanli. A shout came from the front, Yanli ji, don't bother with them. Run. Although she was unwilling, she still quickly left. By the time Xuemeng and the others arrived, the rear hall was in ruins. There were broken pieces of wood and tiles everywhere, and flames were licking the broken beams of the house. In the ruins, 2 flashing white shadows were slashing against each other, the strong winds were sent into the air, and sparks of fire were ignited. The 2 figures were as fast as lightning, colliding and separating in the air at a high speed. A metallic sound was heard as the golden light flashed by in succession. With a boom, the tiles were lifted up. A thick wooden log lying in the middle of the crushed rocks and sand was pulled up high, as if it had awoken. On the other side, a blue wave formed from spirit energy gushed out of the broken golden bricks, surging violently. Figures of people could be seen standing on the top of the giant tree and the top of the wave from the left and right. Xuemeng's face suddenly paled. Shizun. No matter what the truth was, it was Xuemeng's natural instinct to worry about Chu Wanning in the face of danger. Mei Hangxiu narrowed his eyes as he faced the wisps of mist and muttered, Shi Mingjing. The 2 people who had been fighting against each other were none other than Shizun and disciple of the previous timeline, Chu Wanning and Shi Mingjing. However, the strangest thing was that a layer of powerful spiritual energy that clearly belonged to Taxian Jun covered Shi Mingjing's entire body. Black incantations crawled all over his exposed skin, and his meridian channels were even more terrifying. Xuemeng rushed forward, what's going on? Shi Mei, she. With a bang, Xuemeng was ejected out of the battle circle. He struggled to get up and saw that a golden Haitang barrier had been placed in front of him. Chu Wanning looked pale as he said, don't come near me. Mei Hangxiu walked forward a few steps and stood beside Xuemeng. He stared at Shi Mei's unusually strong spiritual energy flow and frowned. Strange. He used his own water-style techniques before, but the power they emanate is completely that of another person now. It was just that after a short pause, Chu Wanning and Shi Mingjing started to fight again. At this moment, both of them had completely released their spiritual energy. The powerful aura forced the other 3 to the point that they couldn't breathe. The sword light flashed past, illuminating his eyes, which were sharper than the tip of the sword. His body was as light as a swallow, and he suddenly swung his sword towards Shimei. Chu Wanning. Shimei's angry shout was almost warped. I have never killed you in my 2 lifetimes, and this is how you treat me. With a loud bang, he raised his hand and formed a seal. A dark blue barrier suddenly appeared in front of Shimei, blocking Chu Wanning's attack. However, upon closer inspection, one could see that the barrier was not formed out of thin air. Instead, it was formed by a sheathless saber bullet ingui. All that flowed in Shimei's body were the ruthless spiritual energy of Taxian Jun. So much so that the holy weapon even recognized the wrong master and listened to his summons to serve him. Chu Wanning's eyes darkened. He said, "No, you've already killed me in both lives." The golden sword was drawn back and a faint crack appeared on the barrier created by Shimei. He saw Chu Wanning somersault in the air, his long legs kicking towards the fissure, borrowing the force to leap backwards, and then throwing Huaxia in his hands towards him. He could only hear the sound of thunder erupting as rumbling black clouds rolled across the sky. In the midst of the storm and thunder and lightning of the 9 prefectures, Huaxia suddenly broke through the barrier of Shimei. Shimei raised his hands to block the attack, but he was not Mo Weiyu after all. He could not bear the power of Huaxia, so he let go of the blade and stabbed it into the ground. Then, the golden holy weapon pierced towards Shimei's chest. Ugh! Shimei barely managed to avoid the fatal blow on his heart. With a swoosh sound, blood splattered in all directions. Huaxia penetrated through Shimei's shoulder and returned to Chu Wanning's palm dripping with blood. Shimei fell back to the ground, falling among the broken bricks. He was still trying his best to cover his wounds as he got up. His eyes flashed with extreme anger and malevolence. "Why did you stop me? What's the use of stopping me? Those who died can come back to life? Do you think you'll stop me and your days will be fine again? Will you be able to return to the past?" Chu Wanning jumped down from the mountain, landing on the ground with his toes, then he stood in the middle of the ruins. His entire body was drenched in sweat. There were wounds and blood, and his expression was indifferent. He did not look like Chu Wanning at all. What he had said was true. The 8 sufferings and everlasting hatred flower had devoured his lover, so he had died in Shi Mingjing's hands for 2 lifetimes. 2 lifetimes. No matter what you do, it's too late. Do you know what you could have done to stop all this? The rain poured down beside the 2 of them, but it did not extinguish their hatred. You should have opened the gate of time and space, life and death in your previous life, gone back to the past, killed Mo Ran and ripped his corpse into pieces and burned it into ashes. You should have killed him. Chu Wanning's eyes were ice cold. What do you mean, starting from the beginning? What redemption? What a joke. It's because you want to save him, and you don't want to kill him. That's why I got his new and powerful spiritual core. It is only because of this that I have been able to reforge Emperor Taxian Jun that the situation has developed so far. As Shimei spoke, he burst into laughter. His eyes were like the eyes of a snake, like the pincers of a scorpion, like a beehive of venom. Shimei gritted his teeth and said, "Because of you. Because you couldn't do it? Didn't you want to stop me? If you had killed him earlier, then everything would be over. What about me? You're the one who implicated these 2 worlds. Don't think that you are without blame, Elder Yu Heng. You didn't do anything. I used the rift in space and time that you left behind to master the foremost forbidden technique and reopen the gate of time and space, life and death." Ha ha ha, ha ha ha. The laughter was as sticky as a spider's web and as sinister as a vulture's. He rolled back and forth, blood trickling from the corners of his mouth. The tattoos on his body were slowly fading away, but he did not care. He did his best to use the most vicious words to insult and curse the person in front of him. Whether infatuation or love, they all disappeared in the torrential rain. He must have underestimated Chu Wanning or thought too highly of himself. He used to be full of himself, thinking that Chu Wanning could become his plaything. As long as the chain was tight, it would be fine to raise it for fun. His life was unnecessary. But at this moment, if I were to start over, the peach blossom eye flashed with anger and cold light. I'd definitely kill you. The last of the magic imprints disappeared. The strong flow of spirit power in Shimei's body suddenly disappeared. The one that was lying on the ground had turned back into the ordinary butterfly-boned beauty feast. Shimei gasped for breath as he looked at Chu Wanning through the rain. He had just used his final killing move, borrowing the divine. He had used this move before in front of Mo Ran after his rebirth, on that night in the inn at Linling Isle. Although it was called a technique, it was actually more like swallowing a spiritual medicine. This pill was refined using the blood of Taxian Jun. It allowed him to obtain Mo Ran's power within the time it takes to burn an incense stick. The power was however not the true power of Mo Ran. It was still lacking. It was nevertheless sufficient for him to use in a lot of necessary situations. This time, his failure to defeat Chu Wanning in a short period of time meant that he was at his wit's end. He knew very well. Watching from the side, Xuemeng's scalp went numb, and he was also at a loss as he said hoarsely, "Shizun. Shizun." Although his voice was weak, the place where Shimei fell was not far away from Xuemeng. He heard his voice and turned his head. Their gazes met and Xuemeng's mind grew increasingly blank. Shimei looked at him for a while. Suddenly, his eyes flashed. Then, a trace of a sad smile appeared on his handsome face. "Young master." Xuemeng trembled violently. In a trance, Shimei's eyes were still the same as before, and his face was still the same as before. He was in such a sorry state, looking so weak. He didn't say anything, and only extended his hand towards Xuemeng. Xuemeng stood at the edge of the barrier. He couldn't help but take a step forward. No, even half a step would be enough, then. However, right at this moment, an intense flash of light suddenly burst forth from Buletin Gui, who had inserted himself into the side. Everyone was stunned. Their gazes all landed on the fierce blade of 100 war. Without any warning, it started to shine with a fierce light. The light alternated between scarlet, green, and blue for more than 10 times before it suddenly erupted into a strong current. Mei Hangxiu said, "Be careful." He pulled back Xuemeng, who had almost stepped out of the barrier. Soon after, they saw an indomitable spirit rise up into the storm. It was like a bright shooting star, shooting straight towards the forbidden area at the back of the mountain. This scene was witnessed by all of the cultivators who were attacking the mountain and fighting against the Zhenlong chess pieces that filled the mountain. Everyone was shocked. "What is that? What's going on?" Shimei narrowed his eyes and looked at the red light that suddenly suffused the mountain behind him. The red light penetrated into his pupils and he pinched the tip of his finger. He then closed his eyes to sense the light. After a while, Shimei suddenly understood what had happened. He opened his eyes with a look of ecstasy on his face. Taxian Jun. Suddenly, Chu Wanning turned around, his face was pale. Shimei laughed out loud, and then said with a fierce look in his eyes, "He's not dead. Ha ha ha. He actually did not die." With strength that came from nowhere, he crawled up from the ground, and before anyone could react, he pressed several acupuncture points on his body to stop the bleeding. With the spread of his bloody robe, he instantly landed on the roof tiles, jumped a few steps, and dove into the garden. Shizun. Chu Wanning could not stay. He turned and looked at Xuemeng, then said to Mei Hangxiu, "Please take care of him." He flew up to the ground and followed closely behind Shimei. Shimei's movement technique was light, and he was not inferior to his Shizun in terms of Qinggong. The two of them stood in front of each other, but Shimei could not get rid of Chu Wanning, and Chu Wanning could not catch him for the time being. In the blink of an eye, the two of them had arrived at the back of the mountain. End chapter.